So Tim Walz is the vice presidential selection for Kamala Harris. I want you to think back to your high school days. I want you to think of the most liberal, obnoxious social studies teacher. The one that would tell you things that have no applicability to reality. Someone who's never had to run a business or had to shower before work or after work. Someone that lives in the clouds and constant abstractions. Someone that would always tell you that communism hasn't been totally tried and that socialism is just about being a neighbor to one another. That is Tim Walz. Tim Walz is that obnoxious social studies teacher. I have nothing against teachers, obviously. Teachers are amazing and important in society. But certain teachers, as you well know, are ones that will drive you nuts because they've never done anything in their life. And by the way, before I go any further, Tim Walz's military track record, very, very suspicious and worthy of examination. So Tim Walz is a social studies teacher who has brought these radical left-wing ideas into Congress and then into the governor's mansion. So who is Tim Walz? Well, it's time that we make sure America knows who you are. Tim Walz helped ignite the George Floyd riots, the worst the country had seen in decades. While Minneapolis burned, he stalled on deploying the National Guard for an entire day, blaming the city for not submitting the right paperwork. Tim Walz let his daughter leak the Guard's deployment plans online so that rioters would know how long they had to loot the city with impunity. Minneapolis is a war zone because of you, and one of the precincts likely would not have fallen if it was not for Tim Walz. Just days after the attempted murder of Donald Trump, you called him and his supporters fascists, egging on the same rhetoric that led to him being shot in the first place. Tim Walz has the most radical abortion laws in the country, zero limits. And then there's immigration. On issue after issue, Tim Walz makes Bernie Sanders look like a moderate. From the burning of Minneapolis, to the rioting, to the looting, and now to open borders. And we will play the tape itself going through what Governor Walz has done in Minnesota. He is dangerously liberal. And now you are looking at the most left-wing ticket in American history. While most Americans are not nearly as pro-life as I am, most Americans believe that there should be some reasonable restrictions against late-term abortion. Even people that would call themselves pro-choice or pro-abortion say late-term abortion is too much for me. That is when the baby has fully and completely developed. We're talking about 22, 23, 24 weeks. In Minnesota, they are one of the late-term abortion capitals of the country. So now in a debate, President Trump with Kamala Harris or J.D. Vance with Tim Walz can say, wait a second, we want to bring it back to the states, but in the state of your running mate or in the state of you, Mr. Walz, Governor Walz, there are no restrictions whatsoever on abortion. Additionally, Tim Walz is an open border zealot. He has repeatedly advocated for driver's licenses for foreigners, sanctuary cities. So let's go piece by piece. I'll allow you to be the judge. Kamala Harris could have run to the center. Kamala Harris could have moderated herself. But instead, she selected one of the most radical, out-of-touch people that they could find in the entire Democrat roster. Let's play cut 39.
Should Minnesota be a sanctuary state?
If the definition of that is that the federal government enforces immigration law and local law enforcement enforces local law, then yes.
Should cities be allowed to be sanctuary cities?
Yes, local control.
Tim Walz also signed into law giving driver's licenses to illegals, regardless of their immigration status. He will enshrine Biden's invasion. He will make it permanent. Play cut 44.
It's done.
A packed room at the St. Paul Armory erupted after the governor's signature made driver's license for all the law of the land.
It is done. Tim Walz on CNN saying that he should invest in a ladder factory to help foreigners climb the border wall. Play cut 42.
And I think seeing a plan that's out there, talking about it with folks, knowing that he's not going to do anything. He talks about this wall. I always say, let me know how high it is. If it's 25 feet, then I'll invest in the 30-foot ladder factory. That's not how you stop this.
During the BLM riots, Governor Walz was talking about equity, saying that they want fundamental change, not talking against the riots, talking against the bedlam that was caused, where Minnesota was burned to a crisp. Play cut 40.
A society that does not put equity and inclusion at the center of it is certainly going to eventually come to the places where we're at. This is a moment of inflection. It's a moment of real change. It's a moment that those folks who are out there demanding this are not going to take a commission or a report. They're going to want fundamental change. And that is what I think that's one of the exciting things in the midst of all this. You can feel a sense of optimism coming back.
This is during the riots. The New York Times reports 2 days after George Floyd died, with protests in Minneapolis turning increasingly violent, the city's mayor, Jacob Free, asked Mr. Walz to please deploy the National Guard. Hours later, the city's police chief submitted a written request for 600 troops. But it was not until the next afternoon that Mr. Walz signed an executive order allowing the Guard to assist cities. It was obvious to me that he froze under pressure, under a calamity as people's properties were being burned down, said State Senator Warren Limmer, a Republican who helped lead a committee that investigated the response to the unrest. Walz's sympathies towards protesters might have delayed a more muscular response. So here the riots were ongoing, and when riots are happening, an hour is a lifetime. An hour is a day. And Tim Walz waited and waited while Minneapolis was being incinerated. Under Walz, Minneapolis became an active war zone. He waffled for 20 hours, an inexcusable and insane delay, where the National Guard, once they were deployed, they were able to quell the rebellion. That is Tim Walz. And it's an amazing combo, as J.D. Vance would say. Let's play cut 51. J.D. Vance says, on one side, you have Tim Walz that allowed the riots to happen. On the other side, Kamala Harris donated to get the rioters out of prison. What a 1-2 combo. Play cut 51.
This is a guy who's proposed shipping more manufacturing jobs to China, who wants to make the American people more reliant on garbage energy instead of good American energy, and has proposed defunding the police just as Kamala Harris does. I think it's interesting, actually. They make an interesting tag team because, of course, Tim Walz allowed rioters to burn down Minneapolis in the summer of 2020, and then the few who got caught, Kamala Harris helped bail them out of jail. So it is more instructive for what it says about Kamala Harris, that she doesn't care about the border, she doesn't care about crime, she doesn't care about American energy, and most importantly, she doesn't care about the Americans who have been made to suffer under those policies.
J.D. Vance he's in tip-top shape right now. He's in great form. J.D. Vance is commanding a national audience right now on Real America's Voice, on Fox, all of the major networks. And he should be. Can you imagine now a Walz-J.D. Vance debate? And just so we are clear, the weird one is that creepy person, Tim Walz. Tim Walz gives you very creepy vibes. He's the one that mandated tampons to be in boys' bathrooms at the age of 10. True story. That's weird. That is creepy. To use it, I guess now we can call other people weird. The media's allowed that. He oversaw the single worst fraud of the COVID era, the Feeding Our Future case. Thanks to his ineptitude at the Department of Education, criminals stole $250 million of taxpayer dollars to spend on luxury cars, houses, and vacations. He also approved a $500 million in hero pay for frontline workers, only have 40% of that money to people who are actually ineligible, or in many cases, literally deceased. In the House, he was a far left-wing Democrat, did whatever Pelosi wanted at any time. But he was selected not because he's a good candidate. He was selected because everyone thought it was going to be Shapiro, but the bigots in the Democrat Party would not put up with it. Van Jones says the quiet part out loud. He reveals that it was the darker elements of the Democrat Party, the base of the Democrat Party, who are Jew haters. That is why Kamala is stuck with a Minnesota Marxist. Play cut 53.
On the one hand, you have a lot of young people who are concerned about Gaza. You have a lot of Muslims and Arabs and others. They have not felt seen by the Biden administration. You start hearing that genocide joke. That was building. And so those folks needed to have a candidate that they could feel comfortable with. This helps them in that regard. But you also have anti-Semitism that has gotten marbled into this party. You can be for the Palestinians without being an anti-Jewish bigot, but there are some anti-Jewish bigots out there. And there's some disquiet now, and there has to be. How much of what just happened is caving into some of these darker parts in the party? So that's going to have to get worked out. It's going to have to get talked through.
Shapiro would have been a much better pick for Kamala Harris. There is no two ways about it. But she was worried about a 1968 convention of the DNC, and her elders say you cannot tear apart the Democrat Party. Just so we're clear, Jews are still going to continue to vote in Democrats in major numbers. It's really sad and it's tragic. And is this not a perfect example of how the base of the Democrat Party does not want Jewish Americans? Doesn't really matter. But that's why Tim Walz is here. It's not like Tim Walz earned it or he's super impressive. He's a communist social studies teacher that was basically thrown into the role. You go piece by piece, this guy is a walking opposition research file. You almost can't believe it. He created a snitch hotline during COVID to be able to tell on your neighbors. Donald Trump and the campaign is wasting no time whatsoever. Let's play cut 52.
Kamala Harris just doubled down on her radical vision for America by tapping another left-wing extremist as her VP nominee. Tim Walz will be a rubber stamp for Kamala's dangerously liberal agenda, like allowing convicted felons to walk free, embracing anti-American Green New Deal policies, and giving up control of our southern border to criminal aliens and violent drug cartels. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, they're failed, weak, and dangerously liberal.
And that is just a little bit of a taste. Kamala Harris is running to her left flank. Tim Walz is unimpressive. He's a communist alongside of his fellow comrade from California.